The 2018 Ohio State Fair happens July 25th through August 5th. Learn more online, daily schedules, and more. OhioStateFair.com. Go behind the scenes and check out the Ohio State Fair on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and even Pinterest, too. Jenny?
Hi, how are you?
I'm Vince. Nice to meet
you. Nice to meet you. Come on in.
We're packing on a lot of butter all at once. And sometimes you're packing it up from underneath, so it's kind of hanging from the armature. And we were, in this case, it was the cow's rear end and udder, which takes a couple 100 pounds of butter. And we had it next to the door, so everybody was coming in and out the door, letting the heat in, and all of a sudden that whole back end of the cow just hit the floor.
The Ohio State Fair and Wessler Media are proud to present A Fair to Remember, discovering the stories and people behind this statewide tradition. This is Season 1, Episode 7.
And we were outside watching, we're like, what's he doing? He's giving this thing the Heimlich maneuver, and then it just crumpled to the floor.
Couple of quick notes before we get started on today's episode. The first one is that there is a surprise episode coming up after this one. So in this episode, we're talking about the butter cow, and I want to tell you about the butter sculpture for the year, but I can't yet because when we post these episodes, it's kind of embargoed and it's a secret. And if I told you, the Dairy Association would, have a cow. So we'll talk about the actual sculpture in a surprise episode coming up. The second thing is we're going to hear on this episode deals, it's kind of more of like a conversation based, because I did like a live on the scene interview with the people who deal with the butter cow. So it's pretty sweet. It's fun. I really enjoyed it. And the next episode after this, even beyond this whole butter talk, is going to be the entertainers at the fair. So that'll be a lot of fun. So with all that in mind, let's jump in.
So the display itself typically uses around a ton of butter. There's always a butter cow and calf. So the butter cow herself has been a part of the fair since the early 1900s. And it was much later when the butter cow found a home in the Dairy Products Building in the 1920s, we added a calf. And then in the 60s, they added a theme to go with it, so multiple sculptures.
So we're walking into the dairy building at the Ohio State Fair with Jenny Hubble. She is the Senior VP of Communications for the American Dairy Association Mid-East. And she's been doing this for like a long time. So the ADA, they're the group that selects the sculpture each year.
The butter is an unsalted butter. It is 55-pound blocks. So, a lot of people think, oh, it's a pound of butter like you get at the store. It's not. You got to have a little bit of larger size butter to work with. And it's actually butter that's past its expiration date. So this is butter that would not have made it to marketplace. We begin working on the process in early spring. We come up with some ideas. We go back and forth, the sculpting team and the folks at the American Dairy Association, to make sure that we're putting together a theme that fairgoers will love and that is something that the dairy community can feel really good about. From there, we work with the team for some sketches and try to really button down what we want to do. I leave the technical part up to the team, certainly. Combined, it's about 400 hours of their time in that cooler, putting the display together. And, it starts out with big blocks of butter and turns into a masterpiece at the end.
It takes a long time and a lot of work to create the butter cow and calf and the themed scene. It's also complicated too, believe it or not.
A cow is a very complicated animal. It's if you're not used to looking at them, it's unlike a lot of other animals that you might have more experience looking at. I did it for a few years, and that was my experience. That they're very there's just a lot of weird bulges and muscles and udders and the feet are very challenging. The hooves are very complex forms.
That's the voice of sculptor Alex Balls. Paul Burrock is also a member of the butter cow team, and while he agrees that the cow itself is a challenge, there is another piece to this puzzle that can cause trouble for him too.
The worst part is the temperature change. You're going from 45 degrees to maybe it's 100 degrees out here. Some summers we've had that. So you're going from, a 50, 60 degree temperature change all day long. And when you come out all dressed up for the cold and you're in a 100-degree barn, it's and you're buttery and greasy, and it's in your hair and it's in your face and all over your shoes. Yeah, that's just something we've learned to deal with.
What's going on?
We've paid tribute to MLS, to the crew when they rolled into town. The Browns and the Bengals, we have partnerships with them for a youth wellness program, and so we were able to incorporate that. Ohio High School Athletic Association. And then on the historical side, one of my favorite is we did a Mount Rushmore, if you will, of the presidents that were born in Ohio.
So when you say armature, basically what you're saying is there is like a wooden chicken wire structure that holds the butter up, because obviously it's not just straight butter in there.
Correct. So there's a couple different types of armatures. For the cow, you're exactly right. You're going to have a chicken
skeleton
wire skeleton that's underneath that butter that gets layered on. Some of the other sculptures, if it's an individual, if it's a person, you're probably just going to have a stick figure under there.
Like, have you ever run out of butter? Have you ever been like, we don't have enough butter to finish the sculpture?
No, you're exactly right. So I typically order about 2,000 pounds. And I can't recall exactly which one it was, but we had to get more butter. Well, all I could find were, 1 pound blocks. And we brought in a lot of 1 pound blocks. Of course, I'm talking 20 pounds, 30 pounds, not hundreds, but still it is, you're just sticking little blobs on, but
They're like put little slabs of Land O'Lakes on the
just to try to get it on there, but it'll work.
So how do you get the job of creating the butter cow each year? Well, the two sculptors you heard from earlier, Alex and Paul, they're both toy makers from Cincinnati, and back in the day one of their bosses heard about the need for a new butter sculptor at the fair.
I am a sculptor in the toy industry since about 2000. I worked for Kenner and Hasbro. I worked on Star Wars, G.I. Joe, Batman, Marvel characters.
When you sculpt a toy, you actually are like sculpting clay. You're creating almost a clay model of it. Can you just describe that for me? Because that'll help people make the connection between toys, how you make a toy, and the butter cow.
Depends on the toy, but we usually start in clay, do a quick, rough mold, and fill it with wax, like you said, and wax is a special wax that we make ourselves. It's very brittle and carvable, holds a lot of detail.
Now, when you see the sculpture that you spent probably hundreds of hours of creating, and that thing collapses, what do you feel? What are you thinking when you see that happen?
I watched it happen, and luckily it wasn't my sculpture, but Bob, who was working on it at the time, was standing behind sculpting a full-size female veterinarian that year, and she started to collapse, and he grabbed her around the waist, and he was pounding on the glass, and we were outside watching, like, what's he doing? He's giving this thing the Heimlich maneuver, and then it just crumpled to the floor, and he just threw his hands up, and
He was so upset.
walked out. And he didn't really say anything. He's like, why didn't you guys come in and help me? And
We didn't know what you were.
what would we do?
Throughout the year, different things pop into my head. I see something, in person or on TV or whatever, and I'm like, that'd be a great sculpture, right? But no, I'm.
You gotta have something on your list.
Yeah,
What do you think? Like, is there a movie star you like? You're like, man, it'd be great to have Tom Cruise in butter or something like that.
So one of my coworkers, I will give her credit for this. One of my coworkers always says, we should do The Simpsons because they're yellow anyway, and they have Ohio connections. That would be fun. But that's not what it is this year.
That is my favorite TV show of all time. Do you want to see my wallet? Let me show you my wallet.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
I have a Simpsons wallet.
All right, there you go.
So what is the 2018 sculpture? Well, I can't say just yet, but in a little piece of bonus content coming soon to this feed, you're going to hear all about it. However, what I can tell you is, well, at least play for you, my reaction when I saw it. Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Tell anybody out. I've got.
Oh, I don't know anything. Oh, this is so cool. That is We'll tell you all about the 2018 display very, very soon. A bonus episode coming up right here on A Fair to Remember.
Under the direction of Omar P. Blackman from Cleveland, Ohio.
A Fair to Remember is presented by the Ohio State Fair and produced by Wessler Media. Shout out to executive producer and PR manager for the fair, Alicia Schultz. She's given me the great honor and duty to help tell these stories. Special thank you to Jenny Hubble, Alex Balls, Paul Brook, and the American Dairy Association Mideast. Our opening theme is the Beautiful Ohio Waltz, as performed by the 1994 All-Ohio State Fair Band. These episodes expertly mastered by Joey Gerwin at Orange Judio Recording Studios. And finally, thank you to anyone who's done anything at all to help make this podcast a reality. And thank you for attending the fair, because you too are part of this great history. This has been A Fair to Remember. I'm your host, Vince Tornero, and I'll see you on the Midway.
Are you ever watching TV and you're like, wow, I'd really like to sculpt them. They've got an interesting looking body, or something like that.
I always wanted to sculpt a miniature landscape with castles or hobbit houses or things that are more fantasy oriented, dragon or something. But usually that doesn't tie in with the Dairy Association's ideas. So
Dragons, dairy, work.
Disney castle or it's any kind of fantasy thing I think would be fun to sculpt.
Hey, again, just a quick reminder, the 2018 sculpture reveal coming up very soon right here on this podcast feed. Spread the word, subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.